Hi everyone, my name is Chad Laflamme. I'm the Outdoor Center Director and Faculty of Adventure Education at Plymouth State University. I'd like to thank you all for joining and participating in Climb Above Addiction. I'm here to talk a little bit about climbing and the role it's played in our communities over the years. And first I want to start with the real early history. Climbing as recreation. And that goes real far back. And climbing back then, the way it's been defined has been pretty different over most recent years, but climbing in the 19th and early 20th century was ascending mountains. So sometimes some people would just call that hiking. But around that time, there was also a lot of national pride as to whose citizens could ascend an unclimbed peak first. And over the years, that has evolved, and through the training to achieve those goals, technical rock climbing became its own popular pursuit. And as early as the 1930s, and probably much earlier as well, the Mount Washington Valley became a really popular training ground for this kind of training. Up in Huntington Ravine, Tuckerman's Ravine, people would practice their rope skills and ascend steeper parts of the rock buttresses despite there being an easier path around. And as time went on, some of these methods and people's training and equipment available really opened up the possibilities within the climbing world. And later on in that century, rock climbing became a pursuit in and of itself. People were no longer just rock climbing in order to ascend a mountain, but they were finding the steepest and most difficult climbs that could be found. And that's been happening all over the world, and certainly all over our state for many decades now. And as close as Rumney, New Hampshire, there's been a lot of development. And if you've ever been there on a weekend, you'll see that it's become a very popular sport. And there's a lot of benefits to this type of recreation. But the benefits of rock climbing extend beyond recreation. People have also found educational and developmental opportunity within climbing and within the outdoor and natural world in general. As early as the 1930s, universities were incorporating climbing along with wilderness travel into their orientation programs to help students grow comfort within the community before they start their class, and developing confidence in that process as well. And later on, towards the 60s and 70s, Outward Bound and Knowles, Outward Bound had just come to the United States, and shortly after, Knowles was founded, and rock climbing has been an integral part of their programming as well. And the programs they offer have a lot of varying intentional outcomes. So sometimes that can be therapeutic or developmental, where they have really target goals they're aiming for, and sometimes they are still focused mainly on recreational opportunity and providing the education required to pursue that recreation. And within the world of addiction recovery and prevention, there's a lot of opportunity there as well. Within climbing, it can be found as a healthy coping skill. So this is a place to get some physical fitness, develop some problem-solving skills, and build some confidence working towards a good challenge. And this can be a great outlet for somebody looking for some healthier opportunity in their lives. And I think one of the biggest opportunities that exists within the climbing world is the opportunity to build community. The climbing itself is great. It's a wonderful workout. It's a nice way to be outside. And you have this opportunity to be part of a really intentional community where the norms can be established in a healthier way. Whereas if maybe at home within that social community, it's not ideal, not an ideal situation for prevention or for recovery. You can find people who are also really motivated to live out a healthy lifestyle within a community that really understands your experience, and you can work through a lot of these challenges together. And the thing about climbing is you can't really put a pin on it as to what exactly climbing does provide or can provide for one certain person. Is a really subjective experience. So if anyone's interested in learning more, I'm going to spend the rest of this short seminar talking a little bit about the basic components of climbing, some of the safety systems, how those work. So it's really geared towards those who have never climbed before. So if you're interested, please stick around. And if you find yourself interested afterwards as well, I can help you get in touch with some professional training. It's best, even with this short seminar, to seek professional training, as without proper training, climbing can be dangerous, but when done properly, it is a quite safe sport. Next, I'd like to introduce some of the basic equipment in rock climbing. Depending on which style of climbing you pursue, some of this equipment might look different, so I'll try to provide that perspective as time goes. But one of the most universal pieces of climbing equipment is the climbing shoe. There is a population out there that does not climb with shoes on, barefoot climbing community. But to each their own. I still wear climbing shoes, despite the rising popularity. And climbing shoes really are a rather special fit. So most people don't climb with regular sneakers that you use for around town or for hiking trails. These are specifically designed shoes with a really soft rubber that help you stick to the rock. And they really do make a pretty extraordinary difference. I think after you climb a few times, you'll really start to notice that, but at first it'll feel like a very odd thing. And part of that feeling is because these shoes do generally fit a little bit tighter than most shoes you will wear. And to size them appropriately, if you're just starting, you don't need a shoe that's really aggressive. So an aggressive shoe will have the toe pointing down like this. Gives you a little bit more leverage on steep rock climbs. But generally when you're starting, you're going to be starting on relatively easy terrain to get the basics down. And you're going to have more of a flat shoe for that kind of approach. And when you're sizing these shoes, generally you want your toes touching the edge of the shoe, but you don't want your toes crunched too much. There might be a little bit of curling, but you certainly don't want any kind of pain. And depending on your foot, you're going to have a different brand of shoe. Really, you just want to find something that's comfortable, but is snug around your feet so that when you're stepping on tiny little edges, you will still have that control with your toes. Whereas if it's too big, you try to stand on a small edge, the shoe might roll up. So the climbing shoes, some types of climbing, this is really all they use. In bouldering, you'll have like a soft pad to land on, and you're climbing, I don't know, boulders as small as 6 feet up to, really kind of depends on your comfort level, 20 feet, something like that. But a lot of climbing, especially around here, seems to be a little bit more popular, but I guess that's arguable, is rope climbing. So, and that starts generally with top rope climbing. And some of that equipment is going to be a seat harness. Way back when, in the 1930s, they were just tying ropes around their waist. But now we have a little bit more of a comfortable opportunity, comfortable equipment. And with these, you want to find something that fits appropriately. It shouldn't be too loose, shouldn't be too tight. And it'll be a seat harness. So one of the loops for your waist, 2 for your legs. Another old school style, I say that because it used to be just the Swami belt. So that was just a wrap around your waist. But with the seat harness, it'll provide a little bit more comfort when you're actually hanging in your harness, which happens time to time. And when you're putting these on, you want to make sure you tuck in all the layers around. And bring your leg loops nice and high. And it should sit just over your pelvis up here. So mine is right here. I have the waist belt up and over and tight enough so that I can't pull it down. And when you're tightening this harness, you need to have at least 2 inches of tail left when you're cinching this down. If you have less, it's not quite enough. And there are various buckling styles. So this is a double buckle. So all I need to do is tighten it and it's good to go. Some other harnesses you'll see will also have some connections for the leg loops, but this one does not have that feature. So one of the others is the climbing rope. So climbing ropes, these are made from nylon these days. And part of that is because of the dynamic nature of this material. So when you're falling on a dynamic rope, it will stretch to relieve some of that strain you might otherwise feel in making a fall. And to connect yourself to the harness, we now tie these into our harness. And one of the more traditional or most common knots we use now is the figure 8 follow through. And you start with this figure 8 skeleton and you feed it through these tie-in points here. So there's 1 and 2, connects your leg loop with your waist belt. And now we just retrace this figure 8 coming back through. Now remember, this isn't meant to give you the skills needed to do this on your own, if you so choose, but really just an introduction of what's happening out there when people say they're going climbing. So now I've tied in, just like this. I'm looking for a small loop down here. My figure of 8 should have nice clean pairs all the way up, no twisting. And you want to have at least 6 inches of tail here. Then you don't need to do anything else with that. And that's tying in. And now that our climber is secure, the climber ties in to the rope. And for top rope rock climbing, the rope goes up. It's anchored in towards the top of the climb, comes back down, and they are tied in on that end. And to secure the climber, we need to have a belayer in this instance. There are many different tools out there. One of the more common is the ATC. And the way this works, you take your climbing rope, take a small bite, pinch it through, you clip it into a locking carabiner, and then this is clipped into your belay loop. So before we had tied in through the 2 tie-in points, and now we're just clipping to this loop here. And how this works, as the climber goes up, the rope gets loose. So as they climb, we need to bring this rope in without taking off our brake hand. And the nice thing about this system, as opposed to just trying to hang on to the rope, when the climber falls and the system goes tight, I actually don't need to have an extraordinarily tight grip to hold this rope. So the way the rope twists through the ATC, it redirects a lot of that pressure onto my harness. So my body is taking that load, whereas this is just holding the rope sturdy. And that's belay device. And now I'll show you a couple different types of climbing through some video to give a little bit more perspective as to how these are applied in the climbing world. Now what we have here is an example of indoor top rope climbing. Here the climber ascends the rock wall, and as I mentioned before, the rope is anchored at the top of the cliff, and then it comes back down to the belayer who is taking in the rope, keeping the climber safe. And as she goes, the rope is pulled in, and she's kept quite safe the whole time. If she were to fall, she would maybe fall a few inches at the most. And once the climber has reached the top, the belayer then takes the rope nice and tight, and the climber can sit back, and then the belayer very carefully lowers the climber back down to the ground. And she of course celebrates. And this is an example of lead climbing, specifically sport climbing, where the protection is already in the wall. The climber starts up with the rope tied into them, and they carry it up with them as they go, clipping it into the protection points. This kind of climbing, this is actually very local, this is in Rumney, New Hampshire, provides an opportunity for people to really push themselves physically and find their limit, and falling tends to be a lot more common in this avenue of climbing. So that's all I have for today. If anyone else has questions or would like to be connected with some professional training, please don't hesitate to email. Thanks. Have a great day. Bye.